Okay, good evening. A lot has transpired since last Thursday night. Who thought that that was going to happen Friday morning and wake up to a situation that was completely different than what we're used to, unexpected, because at one point in time, Iran seemed to be something too big for us to take on. Little skirmishes, sending some drones in to do some attacks, very specialized missions. But to send that many planes and to do that much damage and to intimidate to such a degree, I mean, we're receiving the response through all these missiles, which is just forcing, tremendous nisim neflayos to take place all the time. I mean, absolutely incredible miracles. One of the main points of things like this that we focus on this, but we don't necessarily appreciate that this is the cause of a lot of things. There's two ways to look at it. Either you can look at it as if that there's a war going on and Israel did what it felt it had to do, and now there's a response, a calculated response on our part because we knew this is what was going to happen. We had to prepare for this as well without spilling the beans in advance. And that in the process of this happening, Kodesh Baruch Hu is doing nisim v'neflois and miracles and wonders, and we're witnessing it, and people are pointing it out and looking for connections, and as we like to do, and biblical connections for sure, because we like to believe this is all prophecies from thousands of years ago, going back to that time. It's all meaningful. It's all part of the final redemption. It's, I mean, at least those people who are mitzape Yeshua, those people who are anticipating the redemption as they're supposed to do. And the miracles just happen to happen. I mean, the Gemara says very specifically that a person is not supposed to put themselves in a situation of danger and then rely upon a miracle. I mean, sometimes you can't help it. Sometimes you have to take a risk to do a mitzvah, to do the right thing. I mean, the Holocaust and World War II and World War I, and you just find yourself, and forget about that. Just even 67 and 73 and all the wars have taken place since then. How many? I mean, every time the soldiers go into Gaza, they're taking risks, tremendous risks, life and death risks. So, when you have to take the risk, you have to take the risk, but to unnecessarily take the risk and unnecessarily rely upon a miracle. So the Gemara says you're not supposed to do that because A, the miracle may not happen for you, and B, even if it does, it's going to come off your schuyot in the world to come, which you don't want. You don't want it to happen, no matter how great the miracle is in this world, how much it seems to benefit you right now. You don't want it because the ultimate loss is much greater than the gain you're going to have in this world. So this is not that because this is something we don't, contrary to world opinion, contrary to the idiocy of the rest of the world that doesn't seem to see it that way, that we don't go looking for wars. We never have. Literally, in the entire history of the Jewish people, we have not gone looking for wars, even with the Canaanim, even with the Canaanite nation. The few times we had a Milchamas mitzvah, a war that in fact was a mitzvah meaning you can't get out of it. There's two types of war as far as the Torah is concerned, Milchamas mitzvah and Milchamas reshus. Milchamas mitzvah is a war that HaKadosh Baruch Hu basically commands, or the situation commands. In other words, if God forbid there was an existential war, hopefully we're not at that point yet, but certainly their enemies are pushing towards that. They would love to have that kind of a war. The Arabs have tried to make this an existential war since 1948, if not earlier. I mean, they have made it that way. Just that Baruch Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu has fought back on our side so many times. But when you don't have the Milchamas mitzvah like you had against Amalek, for example, when Shaul was commanded to go in and destroy every last Amaleki in the time of Shmuel Navi, didn't do it, but he did go to war, and that was Milchamas mitzvah. In a situation like that, everybody has to go. As even the chassan, and the caliph from Cheder Yichud, they have to stop whatever they're doing and just go and fight the war because there's no one's pater, no one's free from that obligation. Milchamas of Reshus means it's a war that does not have to be fought, but it might be for a good reason. But taking over extra, parts of land, expanding Eretz Israel, to Syria, things like that, in the time of David HaMelech, right, was a mitzvah reshus. He didn't have to do it, but he did it. And in a situation like that, not everybody. If another person has a reason not to go to war, halakha reason not to go to war, so he didn't go to war, right? And the Gemara outlines in Parashat Shoftim the different situations that so Shoftim, yeah, Shoftim, the different circumstances and scenarios where a person is pater from going to war. Primarily, they have sins on their head they're worried are going to work against them. But the Gemara, the Torah itself gives you different excuses for why, maybe you didn't because you got engaged and you're not married yet. You might planted a vineyard, you didn't get a chance to harvest it yet, and you built a house, you didn't get a chance to live in it yet. But as Chazal point out, that those are just cover stories. The real reason is a person is fear. If they're fearful that maybe they lack the merit to have the type of miracles that are supposed to take place on behalf of the Jewish people when they go to war against their enemies. So, when it comes to Milchemes Mitzvah, you have no choice. When it comes to Milchemes Reshus, so even then you might not have a choice once the war starts. But stam, just to put yourself in a situation and to rely upon miracles, so then you're not supposed to do that. You're causing a miracle to happen. So your actions are causing the miracle to happen. But when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's agenda, we call Ketz HaYamim, the end of days, right? Let's go back to Mitzrayim, right? As the Medrash in Shir Shurim Rabbah says, that when Moshe Rabbeinu came to the Jewish people and said to them, in this month you're going to go free, this month of Nisan, 1 year after the Makos began, you're going to go free. The Jewish people said to Moshe Rabbeinu, not possible. It's not going to happen. Why not? Because there's only two ways we can leave Mitzrayim. Either we have a stronger army, and we don't even have any army, so that's not going to happen. And second of all, if we have the merit for fantastic miracles in lieu of an army, which we don't have, because we know how much idol worship our own people are involved with here in Egypt. So therefore, we don't really have the merit for such miracles to take place on our behalf. That's what they said to Moshe Rabbeinu. He came back and he was mechadesh. He told them something that no one knew until that time. And that was when it comes to a case, when it comes to Zman Geula, when it comes to the time that Kadosh Baruch Hu wants to bring the redemption, it's not us anymore. We might yearn for it, we might anticipate it, we might even prepare for it, but there's a difference between us wanting it and a Kadosh Baruch Hu bringing it when he has to do it for the sake of history and his master plan. And when that happens, it's the miracles that prompt the war, not the other way around. Not the war that prompts the miracles, but the miracles that prompt the war. So, in other words, that we, for whatever reason, were forced to go into Iran to preempt a strike that we feel is coming our direction, and that results in missiles being sent, hundreds and hundreds of missiles being sent to us, to Israel, and us shooting down like 95, 96% of them, right? That's a phenomenal miracle that cannot be taken for granted. I mean, it's almost disturbing, but certainly disorienting. That because parts of Eretz Israel, if you're not, there's no missile landing in your area, even though those sirens might go off, there's no missile landing in your area. You go into your shelter and you sit there for whatever period of time you have to. And people are making jokes out of this whole thing. They're making, comical. I guess this is what they're doing inside their miklat. In the meantime, because you got to do something. But the humor is not. They're not making fun of it. It's a humorous way of pointing out the nace, the hashgacha pratis, the divine providence, and what's taking place around us, continuously. Now, is it on par with Kriyas Yamsuf? No, not yet, because we have this thing called Iron Dome, and we have missiles interceptors, even though it's absolutely remarkable, that these things take off so quickly and are so accurate and can shoot down so many missiles, right? But still, it's like. This is, by the way, this is the exact same thing we find in the Chumash, in Parshas Lech Lecha, when Abraham goes to battle against against the four kings, and he wins. He wins the battle on behalf of the people he's fighting for. 5 kings were fighting against the 4 kings, right? And he wins. And then there comes time to decide, who gets what spoils of war and all the different rewards for having won the war. and they tried to give Abraham some booty. They tried to give Abraham some of the wealth that they were able to capture, or even just regain that they had lost in the meantime. And Abraham is having nothing of it, not a little bit, even a little bit. He doesn't say no, thank you. He doesn't say no, I'm good, I'm fine, it's okay. Nah, put this on. I'll put it on your tab. He doesn't do that, right? He goes, no, chas v'chalila, I took a shmut to Shemaim. I would not, or I'm taking shmut to Shemaim, that I will not take even a shoelace, right? They had sandals in those days, but whatever, and from whatever you got, you want to give to to Avner, and Eliezer, and the other people, but not me. I'm not taking a single cent because I don't want to be able to be said that you made Abraham rich. Okay, does it make a difference? Right? When was the last time you told your employer, no, thank you. I don't want to be known that you made me rich. I want it to be clear that God made me rich. No, there's lots of people who will tell you that God made them rich, but they got it through the stock market, they got it through investments, they got it through working. What's Avram worried about? And also, it seems somewhat inconsistent because when he went down to Mitzrayim with Sarah Menu and Lot and the whole entourage, and this whole thing happened where he took Sarah and a disease broke out amongst some plague broke out amongst the Egyptians, and Paro found out that really he had taken Avram's wife, not his sister, as Abraham had seemingly said that was the case. And when the whole thing was over, and Paro was shaken up enough, and he realized what was going on, so then he decided to give up a whole bunch of wealth to Abraham and everybody else with him, including Lot. Right? So Abraham didn't say anything. Didn't say no, chas v'chalila. I'm going to take you a shvua. No one should even know that that you made me wealthy in any way. I want to be clear that because Baruch Hu made me wealthy. Doesn't say that there. What about later on? Which one is it? When people say, and we say that Paro gave him all this money and all this wealth and all this cattle and all these animals. We say that, right? The Paro made Avraham rich. Because Baruch Hu did it through Paro, but then HaKadosh Baruch Hu did it through the war as well. So what was Avraham's distinction? What was the point he was making? The point he was making was that when it came to Paro, I did nothing. I didn't go to war. I didn't fight anybody. I sat on my hands the entire time that this episode was taking place with Sarah in Paro's palace. And all I could do was trust that Hashem would protect her and everything would work out well. So when Paro gave me all this wealth, it was clearly out of his fear of God, not me. Nothing, it had nothing to do with what I did. I didn't do anything, right? Except deceive him about who my wife really was, to protect me and her, and actually he says I should do well because of you, because I should, because of you. So it's almost like I'm gonna pull the wool over Paro's eyes right now. So this whole thing will happen with the plague, and then he'll be forced to give me all this wealth, and I'll leave Mitzrayim a lot wealthier than when I came down. And then later on by Avimelech, by everybody else, by the Melech of Stone and Shem, what do you call it? Shem, right? Malchi Tzedek, it's a whole different thing. Why? Because he went to war. He battled. Now, his battle was absolutely miraculous. According to some, he had a small army. According to some, he only had Eliezer. But no matter who he had and what he had, these four kings and their armies, their local armies, could not fight against these five kings, and they inducted Avram into their cause. And he goes to war and chases them all over the land, and then he wins the war. And because of that, people might say that the wealth that he had, even though it was a miraculous victory, and even though somehow that he is able to overcome all these kings and win the war, that he's responsible in some way for his wealth because of this. Maybe Kosh Baruch even rewarded him. Maybe Kosh Baruch was saying, because you fought this battle, as a reward, and he calls him Magen Avram, because of what you've done on behalf of the Jewish people, on behalf of the people of Eretz Canaan who were fighting. They were the good guys at the time, and you did this. So here's your reward. You get some of this reward. Avram doesn't want that. He wants it to be clear. It's 100% matana from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's because it was a mechamas reshus. It wasn't a mechamas mitzvah at the time. If it was a Muhammad's mitzvah, it'd be a whole different story. Then it would be clear it was done for Kosh Baruch Hu and was all from Kosh Baruch Hu. But Muhammad's reshus, you don't have to go to war. You don't have to do this battle. So if you take this booty, it might just seem part and parcel, with what goes on in wars. You conquer other people, you get their booty. So the miracle wasn't the reason for the war, although the truth is that's not entirely true. It's not entirely true. How do we know that? Because Rashi brings down that one of the reasons why this war it doesn't say that's the reason why the war took place, but it was a totza'ah, right? It was a consequence. It was a result of this war. Was the fact that the king of Sodom had not believed that Abraham was saved miraculously from Ur Kasdim, from the fiery furnace. In those days, you didn't have social media. There weren't pictures posted all over the place. There wasn't even probably a newspaper at that point. And if there was a newspaper, this chiseled out of stone and trying to capture Avram being saved from Ur Kasdim was probably very difficult to do in stone. Whatever, papyrus, but he didn't believe it. It was more like a rumor that was the case. But when he was saved from the tar pits, right, miraculously, Rashi brings down the Medrash that at that point in time he says, "Oh, now I see it's possible. Now I believe retroactively in the miracle that happened for Abraham." So maybe it's not so different, right? Maybe it is exactly what we're talking about over here. Maybe the reality is that the whole war in Eretz Canaan in Parshas Lech Lecha was to bring out the miracle. The miracle was the reason for the war. So then why is Abraham so uptight? It's machmir. That's how devoted he is. In fact, it's not so much that. It's in the statement itself. It's not in the not taking of the money, but it's that statement that he makes that I don't want it to be seen or thought for 1 second that you made me rich. Only Kosh Baruch Hu did. Only Hashem did. And that's what had to come out of this thing. But the miracle itself was the reason for the war. So that's the whole question here. That's the question we're grappling with. And that's why it's so incredible. Really, I mean, usually whatever's going on in the world can be connected to the weekly parsha. Usually that's the case. I mean, when it comes to Chagim, for sure that's the case, but or at least in advance, because by the Chagim itself, then we change the reading to be able to say the karbanos that are shaykh, because that doesn't come on every parsha. You can't. It doesn't work out that way. So therefore, we have special readings on Pesach and Shavuos and on Sukkot and Simchas Torah. Shmir Seder, same day here, right? But only Chanukah is a holiday where we don't change the parshiyot. By Purim we also do, right? But Purim is coming Shabbos, but at least during for Purim itself we have to read a special parsha. But by Chanukah, it does come over Shabbos, sometimes even 2 Shabbases. And the Parsha always line up with Miketz and V'yeshiv, and they're always Chanukah related. It always just works out that way. Because Hashgacha Pratis, but Chanukah is the holy of Hashgacha Pratis, and the story of Yosef and his brothers is the story of Chanukah. It's all about Chanukah. And we've done that before, umpteen times, and we'll do it again, God willing, in the winter once again. We get there. But just in everyday events, if you pay attention, if something happens, again, remember the klal David HaMelech laid down for us? Me'es Hashem haisa zos, hinifas beinenu. This is from God, that which is wondrous in our eyes. If it catches your attention, if it stands out, and this definitely captures our attention, and definitely stands out, a war with Iran, especially since the Midrashim predicted this. They talked about this. Now, you have to understand, for a while, I mean, Iran's been in the picture now for over 10 years at least, but there was a period of time when Iran kind of disappeared from the picture. 1948, Iran wasn't involved, right? Because the Shah was in power at that time, and he was on the side of the Americans, so therefore he was on the side of the Jews, right? So only once that they overthrew the Shah, I think the 1970s, right, and the Ayatollah took over, it became an absolute, an enemy of the Jewish people. And they planned and they talked about it for the longest time, building up and building and building up and promising to go to war against Israel. But even when they were promising, making these threats, they weren't making good of it, except they were working through Hezbollah, through a satellite, rogue nation, so to speak, if you will, right, working against the Jewish people. But they weren't so prominent as they are today. And the Medrash talked about this thousands of years ago, predicted it. Daniel in his prophecy alludes to it, and here they are, right, center stage with the Jewish people, potentially triggering World War III because it's very precarious. I mean, anybody who learns history, and I personally do for two reasons. One, I love history. I just find it very fascinating ever since I was a kid, right? And the second thing is because there's a lot to learn. And I watched documentaries on World War I and World War II specifically to notice the Hashgacha Pratis. And these are Gentile documentaries. These are documentaries made by not religious people who are not talking about the hand of God. But it is absolutely amazing how much you can see the hand of God in these documentaries, because almost invariably they point out, because I like to, it's part of the presentation, they point out things that really shouldn't have happened that did happen, or things that really should have happened that didn't happen, and how it changed the course of the war. And they're amazed by it. I mean, one of them I think was beautiful. I was watching a one on the battle for Midway, and it was a very important turning point of World War II, right? And how after watching, the Americans were outmanned, outgunned, technology, the whole thing, and they still won the battle anyhow, which destroyed, was destructive for the Japanese Navy, which was more powerful than the American Navy at that time. And the announcer who's narrating this document says at the end of the whole thing, he says, and the Americans were smarter about this, but most important of all, wait for it, they were lucky. That's this whole documentary about the Battle of Midway and all the drama and all the information and everything and the technical details they're providing, and the background and build up and the whole, and the last lines of this 2-hour documentary is, and they were lucky because it could have gone the other way too. For example, in those days they didn't have GPS. In those days, they didn't have ways to, accurately. I mean, they just had started developing radar, and sonar, things like that. But they didn't know where the Jap. You can imagine that this big, huge Pacific Ocean, and they're looking for this massive Japanese fleet on its way to Midway, on way to Hawaii eventually, right? And they can't find them. These planes are flying around with limited fuel and their bombs, right? And if they cannot find the Japanese army and they have to return back to base, they have to drop their bombs at sea. They can't come back with their bombs. They reload when they go back. It's a wasted mission, and they almost had that. And only by some gut intuition, the lead pilot of one of the squadrons decided and said, right, let's try this way. And the other guy says, but we're running out of fuel. We need to get back. He said, well, let's just try this way anyhow. And by Hashgacha Pratis, they found the Japanese fleet and were able to drop a tremendous amount of bombs and disable, an aircraft carrier, one of the biggest in the fleet at that time, and do tremendous damage. And then another one, basically. World War One, right, was not supposed to be World War One. World War One began because Germany went to war, an empirical nation, went to war to try to take parts of the Balkan and different places around there, right? And because they wanted more living land and they wanted more resources, and they thought the whole campaign would take 1 month and they'd be finished. That was it. 3 years later, they're still battling, bleeding soldiers nonstop, and eventually they lose the war and they're dismantled. When they began, they were like one of the most impressive powers in Europe. When they were finished, they were nothing. The Weimar Republic was a shadow of what it was before, which is exactly why Hitler got so angry, and even though he was Austrian, not German, but he eventually, tried to get it all back, regain the glory of Germany. and led to World War II. And then Chamberlain, coming back from Munich in 1938 with a paper in his hand, the white paper saying, "Look, guys, peace in our time." And we're all going, "What? You crazy? You're talking from hope?" We don't plan these things. It's not like let's go have a world war. We don't plan these things. That's why everyone like looking on today. Excuse me. Everyone looking at today is wondering, right? Will anyone be that stupid? Come on, there's Russia, there's America, there's nuclear bombs, but no one wants to drop nuclear bombs, even though Russia is threatened to use them, and other countries, and Pakistan has them, and who can trust them for 2.5 seconds to even have these things? India seems a little bit more responsible, and they have them too. And of course, Israel secretly has hundreds of them, and this place is like literally a shack filled with gunpowder and with people walking around with matches constantly, throwing matches all over the place, lit, and it's just amazing the whole thing hasn't blown up. But that's only because God has said until now, no. But it changes his mind. Look what happens. Moshe Rabbeinu was born. People forget about this fact. He was the Mashiach in his time. He didn't become the full Mashiach because the Jewish people, well, history had to be lived out. So he couldn't finish the job at that time. But he was walking the face of the earth for 79 years. In the course of the 79 years, Paro and Egypt were killing Jews and backbreaking slavery. And to the last second, the worst part of the slavery was after Moshe came down to Mitzrayim. And he lost all of his credibility with the Jewish people because rather than make the situation better, as redemption usually implies, it made it worse. The whole thing is so confusing and so convoluted. And we spoke, or different times about the different ways in which Baruch Hu runs the world. In Kabbalah, these things are discussed all the time. They're important to discuss because there are different levels of light. And there's an Or Makif and there's an Or Panimi. And as the Leshem explains, the Or Panimi it's like an inner light. It's more reduced. It's more filtered. And because of that, it tends to make more sense. Things happen that are logical to us. It's like logical to us. What is that even supposed to mean? I mean, look at the world today. People are dictating what the world should look like, and then you ask yourself, who are these people? What do they even know? Where are they even coming from? And we have movie stars and famous people trying to dictate to Israel, international policy and social policy. And these are people who are getting paid millions of dollars to do things that if the Sanhedrin was here today, they'd get skila or something close to that. And these are the people, like who are we talking about? Like, what's the mentality? What is this world? Who's giving us our marching orders? You have to stand back and look at these things. But in the meantime, right, the question is, and this is what Moshe says to the Jewish people. He says, you're right. Normally, when it comes to non-Kates oriented history, when it comes to history in between times of redemption, either partial redemption or complete redemption, in between when history is being lived out, like the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. The Jewish people are still the Jewish people. The Jewish people still had the same goals as they always had. The Torah was just as relevant as it always was and is and will be. Nothing has changed for 5,785 years. The only thing that's different is life gets in the way. Life is distracting. Life is deceiving and makes people think the wrong thing about life. So therefore, Moshe said, in this month you're going out. They said, no way. So Moshe said, yes way. So they said, how way? And he says, because when it comes to Geula, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu has decided this is a time that this has to happen, then all of a sudden, he takes the steering wheel out of the hands of man. Right? Not that we ever really had it, but at least he gave us the impression that we did. And we get credit as if we do. But there comes a time because Baruch Hu says, no, now it's my turn. Now I'm driving. Now I'm the one leading. Right? Now my plan is what's going to make everything else happen the way it has to happen. So this whole thing, whether it had started because of politics, whether it started because of Iranian threat, whether because this, to silence the left, whatever other, things came into the picture to convince the prime minister now's the time to act and cause this to happen, because you see how it changes everything. Everything, the whole focus becomes completely different. The first thing that happened with this war, right? Hamas is not worried. The Palestinians weren't concerned about life and death of anybody else. They're worried that this is going to distract the world away from their plight. This war become too prominent a thing because people are easily distracted by other things. That's their whole focus. Kosh Baruch Hu started because he wants to reintroduce himself into history. He wants to make us Gula oriented, because unfortunately we're not enough, right? We're not. Some people are, but even the people that are, again, life is very distracting. So he wants to perform these miracles, but he needs an excuse to do it. He can't just like we wouldn't notice them. There are miracles we say in davening, "Kol nisecha, v'chol niflosecha," for even the tiniest miracles that take place every single day, all the time, all around us. Not just the big, victories that and the splitting of the sea and things like that, but even the small things like just, being able to get up in the morning, get out of bed in the morning, have food on the table, and all these things that are miracles. Even if the food's sitting in the fridge, that's a miracle. It's all miracles, all miracles, all miracles. And we forget about these things. People say, Modi manachnu lach, some people 3 times a day, right? Men say at least 3 times a day. And if you ask them, well, what do you mean when you say those words? What do you mean what are you thinking when you say those words? And I guarantee you, like 99.9% of the population will have to stop and pause and say, what do you mean? I guess, no, that's not the relationship we're supposed to have. That's why it's so coincidental, right? That we don't believe in coincidence. So it's so hashgacha. It's such incredible hashgacha pratis that this thing happened last Friday, and it's taking place this week of Parsha Shlach Lecha, because that's the whole machlokus, the whole disagreement between the 10 spies and Yeshua and Kalev, who represent two sides of the Jewish people. And don't be fooled by the proportion over here. This is what goes on in Jewish history all through time, right? What 10 versus 2? What's the proportion? It's 1/5. They're 1/5. 2 out of 12, right? They're 1/5 of the population. 4/5 of the population died in Mitzrayim, in Makkis Choshech, right? And the Gemara says, as we have quoted so many times already, right? V'amar Rava v'chedi Moshe Mashiach. What happened there is going to happen there. What happened back in Mitzrayim is going to happen also by the end of days, by the final redemption. And what's going to determine who survives and who doesn't? I mean, this is a frightening thing to think about it, to behold. You have to really think about this, all the time, and get it into your heart, as we say at the end of this week's parsha. There's a reason why Parshat Tzitzis comes as the conclusion to Parshat Shlach Lecha. We're talking about how tzitzis, about aligning our hearts with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, and what tzitzis represent. But one of the most important insights you can, especially at this stage of history, especially to understand this week's parsha, comes from the Ramban. And the Ramban, as far as I know, is the only one who points this out. But the same word is used in Moshe Rabbeinu's instructions to the spies going out, or so. Look at the land. But look at, he doesn't just say, spy the land, suroso, like to spy the land. Urisem, right? Take a look at the land. See it. See it. It's a big difference to just spy. Spy the land just takes, take notes, write down observations. I wonder how many spies even remember later on what they saw. But Moshe's instructions are, don't just spy the land. Take a look, take note, look at the land and pay attention. And what does it say in the Tzitzis? Or right? You should look at the techelis, the blue thread. So Ramban asked the question, he's going on the pshat, that there's no coincidence. There's a reason why the Torah puts that at the beginning of the parsha, where they failed, and at the end of the parsha, where we're supposed to succeed. because also Korach now follows after that. It's all tied to the Chelis, and he's got the same problem. It's like the Torah is telling you, I taught it to you, like just like Miriam, I taught it to you, and you failed. I taught it to you, and you failed. Right? Does anyone get this right? Let's try. Right? So what does it mean? Why is Urisem like to see them? Right? The Chelis. So Ramban explains, beautiful shot. Right? One of my favorites still this very day, and I must have heard about 25, 30 years ago. And he says the following thing. He says, what does this mean? You're looking at a techelis, one thread, right? One thread, one blue thread, and that's supposed to remind you of God, Torah, misses the whole package. One blue thread. What is it? How does that work? So the Gemara itself says, it says that when you look at this blue thread, it's supposed to remind you of the sea, which is supposed to remind you of the sky, which is blue, right? It's supposed to remind you of the Kisei Kavod, which is in Shemayim, the sky, Shemayim, which is supposed to remind you of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and your relationship with Him, all from a single blue thread. Remarkable, he says, isn't it? Right? A blue thread is supposed to take you that whole journey all the way to Shemayim. He says that's the same thing that Moshe was telling the spies. You're going to go in there. We're not supposed to be there yet. It's not, we're 3 days away. So much can happen in 3 days, and so much will happen in 3 days. Look at what happened in the course of a couple of days. We got the Yam Suf and split the sea and the Man. And I mean, look at things. A lot's happening in the course of our journey to redemption, because that's all we're going to, by the way. Even though the Torah says, I brought you out of Eretz Mitzrayim to bring you to Eretz Canaan to be your God, as if Eretz Canaan, Eretz Israel is the final destination. Eretz Israel is just redemption. Eretz Israel is another name for Geula. It's another name for the redemption. That's what it is. But going to Eretz Israel, spying the land, is another way of saying spying the redemption, taking a look at the redemption in advance. The Meraglim didn't want redemption. Why not? Well, they have a good. They're having a good time in the Midbar. What are they going to get? What will they get in Eretz Israel that they don't already have in the Midbar? They're having, I need a kavod, clouds of glory, food delivered to their door, pretty much, every single day. A miraculous, well following them around the desert. No need for dry cleaning, because their clothes never rot or get dirty or anything like that. Miracle upon miracle upon miracle. And you want us to leave that for Mitzrayim? I mean, sorry, for Canaan? Mitzrayim, they're going to go back, right? But for Canaan, nothing doing. We don't want it. We don't want the Geula. We're going to Eretz Israel to reject Geula. Not reject God, not reject Torah, just reject Geula. But the Pasuk says, I took you from Mitzrayim to bring you to Eretz Canaan to be your God. And the Gemara says, anybody who lives in Israel, as if they have a God. Anyone who lives in Chutz La'aretz, as if they don't have a God. Even though you're doing Torah mitzvahs. The Gemara calls it Avodah Zarah B'Tahara. It's as if you're worshiping idols in purity. How can you worship idols in purity? Because you're pure. You believe in God. You're living by Torah. You're doing the mitzvahs. But you're living in a land where God does not reveal himself in such an obvious way. So it's easy to be deceived into thinking that it's really Starkist that makes great bananas, not a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And it's not Starkist. What are you? Sun, what's it? Sunkist? It's been such a long time. Starkist makes tuna fish. Sorry, and they make it here too, right? But it's like you're thinking all the companies, thinking all the technology. That's what's responsible, right? But it's a Kodesh Baruch Hu just as much there as here, but he doesn't reveal it so much, because over here it says, right, my eye is in this land 24/7. I will make it clear that I'm the one who's calling all the shots in this land, so that you can have this ongoing, close, deep relationship with me. And that's what it's all about. That's the Geula. So then, what was the message, they're getting out in the desert? It's like somebody who, Rahman Islam, God forbid, their house burns down. And their neighbors, they have Rahmanas on them. What's the Rahmanas? That they tell them, listen, obviously you have nowhere to go. Please, we have a couple of rooms, come into our house, feel free, you can, contribute, not contribute, feel free to go into the kitchen, take food, make yourselves at home in the meantime, while you try to get yourself back on your feet. And it's great. In fact, it's so good that the husband and wife decide, you know what, why not just hang out here? Why not just stay here as long as we can? right? It's not costing us very much. This beautiful environment, nice people we're living with, right? Why not? Why not stay here and enjoy yourselves? So after a while, the Balabayas and his wife, they look at each other and say that, this is not exactly what we intended. The whole point of it was that they should stay here and enjoy the security, the safety in the meantime, but while they're actively trying to get, their house back again. Then we have the patience for this. But to move in and become a second family in our house on our cheshbon, they pay for themselves still. Where's the privacy? We don't have that anymore. No, it doesn't work. Eventually, you start to lose your patience and temper, and enough is enough, right? But even if it takes a year, but you see they're doing the best they can, they want to have their house back. They want to go where they're supposed to go, and it takes longer than they thought. You have the patience, even if it's trying, it's difficult because you see they're trying. So Hashem says to the Jewish people, this idyllic environment, this Eretz Yisrael, atmosphere and reality I've given to you in the midbar, that's a temporary thing. That's just to get you to Eretz Yisrael, and you want to stay here? No way. No how, right? But they went with that idea. They went with that desire, even though they covered it up and made it look like we're going to see what it's like. And Moshe gives them instructions to try to keep on the straight and narrow. But that's not their kavanah. It's not their intention. Yeshua and Kalev, they can't wait for the redemption. They're just been chalishing, to get there to Israel, to finally finish it off, that maybe Moshe Rabbeinu will be Mashiach in the end. Even though there was a prophecy he's not going in, but maybe we can change that somehow and just build the base of Mikdash and have the Shechita come down and evil be gone from the world once. We've already seen enough evil already. Just give it the whole thing. That was their kavanah. And those two intentions completely affect the way you look at the world. So when they came to the land, right, Yeshua and Kalev versus the other 10 spies, right? The 10 spies say, look, this land produces giants. I just saw the medrash today that says that Kalev stood in front of the 10 spies and they forced them to cut down the fruit and bring it back. They didn't want to bring back that fruit. They wanted to bring back bad fruit, not good fruit. So they could say, see, the land doesn't produce good fruit. He said, either you bring this fruit back, right? Or either I kill you or you kill me. But either way, we're bringing back the good stuff, right? Today, Tanuva ships the good stuff to Chutzlarts, and we don't get the best stuff because it goes to everybody else. But even what we're left with, until I knew that, I didn't even notice. Because Baruch Hashem, what we have here is wonderful. I can't imagine what's better about what's being sold abroad in the end. But Baruch Hashem, tremendous stuff. That was the situation. Or so. Take a look, see it for what it is, right? Because that's the whole thing. That vision is what allows you to understand what Geul is about and to recognize it coming. And it's like putting on these, the special glasses that allow you to see things in 3D, 3D. You watch these things and you can see with the color glasses and you can see 3D, things that are hidden away, you can now see because of the light and all that. And that's the difference. The Torah is telling you at the end of the Parsha, you know why they failed? Because when it came to seeing the land, they came to seeing the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yeshua and Kalev, they come back and say, look, this land is so amazing, it makes giants out of people. The same thing, as Rashi points out, that the curses that the Meraglim spoke about were the same blessings that Yeshua and Kalev spoke about. The exact same thing. Different take. That's all. Because we're similar, that whole thing. What we're going through right now, you have to understand, it's not just a war. It's not just simply Kodesh Baruch Hu saving us from a situation that, it's like, you get a phone call from your brother. Hi, I'm in trouble again, right? I need your help. You bailed me out before. Please help me. That's not that. It's not we're calling Kodesh Baruch Hu and saying we need to be bailed out once again. It's Kodesh Baruch Hu saying, we've reached the end, folks. It's time. Come on, there's got to be a Kate summit, some point in time. In Babylonia, right, it went on for 70 years, and they were in doubt. All these kings are making predictions, when it's over, and they're wrong, and they're wrong, and they're wrong. And so the Jewish people don't believe it either, Because how many times is this going to be talked about and calculated, and it still doesn't happen? So when it finally, Mordechai was the only believer. Can you imagine that? They wanted to kill Mordechai. They thought he was a rodef, someone who was endangering the Jewish people. The first plan was to get rid of Mordechai so that Haman wouldn't get angry. We could just go about our business as usual until they realized that Mordechai was the one who was seeing Uri Semoso. He saw, which by the way is tied to Techelis. Mordechai and Techelis are very much touch each other. That's a discussion to itself, maybe by Purim as Hashem. That's what's going on. Because Baruch Hu right now is asking the question, who sees, who doesn't? He started this war. He's making all this happen. And even with the casualties, no one's dying before their time. This is not to be callous. This is not to in any way minimize. I'm not doing that. I'm just pointing out a fact that Kabbalah speaks about, that no one dies before their time. It's just a question of how and when. And when people die as Jews in Eretz Yisrael, even if they're secular, they die al Kiddush Hashem. They die for the sake of being there. Even if they could live somewhere else. They could live in chutzlars like many Israelis do, but they don't. They chose to live here. In the meantime, they're still here. And this happens to them. But it's all regular. Because it's not under control. It's not like this guy was supposed to live another 100 years. And look at this. Look at the Iranians did. They killed him anyhow. No, they can't do that. It's not possible. So it's all run by Shemayim. And because Baruch Hu is doing the miracles to reveal him to us at the end of days. Because come on, let's face it. He took a break for about over 1,000 some odd years. We haven't had prophecy since 3,448, which is like almost 28. Where are we now? 57. It's like 3,000 years, almost 3,000 years later. 2,500 years, some year later. He hasn't talked to us. Now he's starting to talk to us once again, and we're the generation to witness. And I mean, even the Gra in his time in the 1700s called himself a generation Dor Batra'ah, the final generation. And that's the 1700s, 18th century. And here we are hundreds of years later, back in the land, having developed it. The Gemara says, and I mean, I can go on forever about this thing because it's all over the place, right? But the Gemara says that one of the signs that Mashiach is imminent, Tekabel Shofar Gadol, comes after the bracha of Berech Aleinu, which the Gemara says is talking about taking the desert and making it bloom, bring all the produce back to the land. Look at this place. Hang on, Uri Semosa, take a look, see it for what it is. You have to. That's what it's telling you to, because that's what the Kodesh Baruch Hu wants. And the faster that we do that, the less we have to go through. He's making a division, a distinction. Who sees and who doesn't. And Bezrat Hashem will end up on the right side of the line, because those are the ones who are zeicha, as we see Mitzrayim, to go out, to see, to witness, and be part of the final redemption. It should come here, Bezrat Hashem, without any more suffering and difficulty for Klal Yisrael.